welcome you to some new ideas. If one is to believe what they hear in this world, and many of us are afflicted with this notion, we sometimes gain some false concepts of what really is there because of the hype of people with something to gain by additional sales and false claims based upon to coin a word, chasing after the emperor's coat. We all of us like to think that our ears are the best, or maybe just a little better than the other guys, and the truth of it is, in spite of what the hi-fi merchants will tell you, your ears are lousy, terrible, worse than that. And we're here to prove that to you. There are some ways that your ears are fantastic. And as a matter of fact, perhaps that's best shown the fact that you can hear a very, very, very weak signal. And because you can hear a very weak signal, most of the sounds we hear are relatively quiet sounds. It's kind of interesting. I can drop this piece of chalk on this table here, and all of you can hear it real easy. Easy. But how many foot-pounds of energy is represented by that piece of chalk dropping on this table? And I'll take this piece of paper here, which happens to be convenient, and it weighs 4 or 5 pounds, and give it a long, and you can hear that. You don't have any problem with that. How many thousands of times is the ratio between the sound of the chalk and the sound of that piece of paper hitting this board here? Thousands of times. And yet your ears easily accommodated that. The reason for that is that your ears don't hear in a linear fashion. Specifically, they hear in a logarithmic fashion. How many of you have had logs already in school, so you understand logs? Well, a few. All right? Now let's give you a quick course in the way things work. Many of the things we measure are done on a linear scale. We have a ruler and we measure inches and feet. If we measured sound on a linear scale, in order to measure the sound of the chalk as compared to the sound of the magazine on the table, it would be difficult to have a ruler long enough to measure the loud sound. At the same time, we're using a ruler small enough to measure the little sound. Okay? Does that make sense to you? So we create another kind of ruler, if you will. We create a ruler whose values start with little sounds, and we're going to say 1 microwatt. Now, you can hear even less than that, the truth is, but that's a good place. A millionth of a watt is not very many watts. 10 times that would be 10 microwatts. 10 times that would be 100 microwatts. 10 times that, 1,000 microwatts. 10 times that, 10,000 microwatts. By the way, 1,000 microwatts is also 1 milliwatt. So this would be 10 milliwatts. And then here is 100,000 microwatts, or 100 milliwatts. And by the way, that is 1/10 of a watt. All right, going up a little farther, 1 watt. 10 watts. 100 watts. How many of you really think that in order to hear your hi-fi system correctly, you've just got to have an amplifier that will handle at least 100 watts? A lot of people do, or there wouldn't be very many of them around. And there's lots of them around. In fact, how many of you know somebody with a 500 watt amplifier in the home to make sure they can hear every nuance of the music? Right? Right. Okay. I'm here to tell you that if we consider this to be a standard, let's take this one here, 1 milliwatt. Would you believe that when you're using your console over there at MassCom and the meter comes up to 0, what it's talking about is a power of 1 milliwatt, because our recording devices we use handle small powers. So we set up our equipment to work at about this level. And so we can call this 0 dBm, because in the logarithmic system, 10 to the 0 power is equal to 1. So we start with our scale, which doesn't progress 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, but rather progresses 1, 10, 100, 1,000, 10,000, in order to be able to hear the little sounds and the big sounds. And your ears do hear that way. Other than that, your ear, and one of the little problems it has, in order to hear the world's sounds, the things which normally occur in nature. In other words, when our ancestors come down out of the trees, they were still dodging things. And right about there, it's the guys with the best ears that live to dodge again. Correspondingly, our ears took on characteristics by the process of selection. At least that's one explanation of it. And I don't get down that other corner. However it be, the fact is our ears hear sound on a percentage basis as far as the pitch is concerned. We can tell readily, and I'm going to kind of divide this board into 2 halves here. We can hear readily the difference between 100 and 200 cycles, because that's a 2-to-1 change. But if I was to say 100, 1,000, and then 10,000 cycles, when I get up to 1,000 cycles, I can I can hear the difference between 100 and 1100 cycles quite readily. Not as easy as I can here, because this is an octave of change. When I double the frequency, I have an octave of change. But when I get up here to 1000 cycles, in order to get up another octave, I'd have to go to 2000. And I can hear a change of from 2000 to 2100, but it's very difficult for me to hear the difference between 10,000 and 10,100. On a linear scale, there's still 100 inches between it, but on a logarithmic scale, it's a very small change. What we're saying is that it's just as easy or just as difficult to hear 10,100 as it is 101, because the percentages are the same, and your ear hears by percentages. All right? Now, there's a lot of controversy about what you can and what you can't hear in this world, so we're going to show you some of the things you can hear. You can hear a waveform of about 30 cycles a second. You can't hear a waveform of 20. You may hear the loudspeaker moving, but you're not hearing a sound because you're deaf as a post at 20 cycles a second. The ear just doesn't function. I have on the screen a low-pitched tone. And by the way, for those of you who are into electronics, we've set this up intentionally so we could see the return trace of the oscilloscope. Many times, we see oscilloscopes without really realizing we see the presentation on the oscilloscope, but we don't really understand that it's made by one beam of light created by an electron gun in the back of that thing, squirting out a bunch of electrons onto the screen, which makes it glow. Just for the heck of it, I'm going to slow that down a little bit if it'll catch. Sometimes it has trouble. Is it going to do it? It isn't going to do it today. It's I guess it's tarred. Catch. Do it. Can you see it's one beam? It's making it kind of distorted, but it's just one beam. Now if you'll direct your attention down here, if you could see it, and you can see it, can you see the cone of the loudspeaker moving in and out along with it? If I turn this up a little bit, I know you can. So we're going to set it about there. You can see it move. See that?
What cycle is that?
What does it say here?
13.
About 13 cycles a second. And you see the oscilloscope is telling us, you can see it, it's actually one little dot that's making it. We can control the action of the barber pole on that oscilloscope, you see. If we speed it up. All right, so let's increase this a little bit. Here's a 15. All right, you can still see it, but you can't hear it. Now listen, that cone is moving in and out that far, isn't it? You can actually see the cone move in and out that far. And it's every time this thing is up, it goes forward, and every time this thing is down, it goes back. So what this really is then is a graph of the electrical voltages that are taking the speaker back and forth. All right? That's all it really is. It's just a graph of the electrical voltage which is moving the cone of the speaker. And the speaker's not grabbing the air real well. I'm not going about to say that it is, but it's trying to get a purchase on the air, and it does rustle it around. You can hear that function of it. Now let's run it up a little bit further. 20. This thing says 19. We got an argument going here. We'll take this one. It's a good one. All right? You still can't hear it. Can you see it? Can still see it. It's moving a lot faster. It's starting to get to the point where your eye can't see a motion of a 20th of a second easy. It doesn't see it. You have to have a stroboscope to see it when you get, because the eye can't see that fast. But if we turn it up a little bit, 24, 23, you can just barely hear it. What you can hear is the motion of the cone, not a sound. I want you to note that the size of this thing is not changing, and that the motion of the cone is going in and out with the same amount of going out, but your eye can no longer see it because it's moving too fast now. "27 cycles a second. You can hear a rustling of the air, but you don't hear a tone. 28, 29 cycles. All right. How about 30? And you'll note a change. Come on, take off you. You can hear a very low-pitched note if you listen carefully.
What's the wattage level at that you have at?
Oh, probably a half a watt. It isn't a big thing. Okay, 29 cycles. That says 33 cycles a second. Does anybody know what the lowest pitch of a pipe organ is? Will you try for 32? You can just hear it, right?
Is that how many years? Is that the lights or is that math?
Yeah, they're making a little racket, but this is coming from over this direction, and it's very low pitch. You can hear it. Very,
Low hum.
Is it a hum that we're hearing?
a very low hum. Very low hum. Let's turn it up a little bit more. Now you can hear it. Okay. Would there be any reason then to have an amplifier that amplifies lower than 30 cycles a second if you can't hear it? That would be wasted effort, just making the speakers get hot for nothing.
Isn't that what they have that sensor around it that projects lower than that?
Oh, sure, and that's the sensation. Like, and then it got a whole bunch of watts to move the whole, you know. Oh, you bet, sure. But now, hey, for what it's worth now, we'll go on up. Here's 40 cycles. That says 46. You can hear it now pretty easy. Without changing anything, because, hey, your ear is more sensitive to some tones than it is to others. There's quite a range and change. You can hear something at 100 cycles a second a lot easier than you can at 30 for the same amount of power. And at 1,000 cycles, your ear is just about at its most sensitive point. So we'll move this on up. Now remember I told you you had difficulty in hearing the distance between 100 and 101, but you could just hear it. Okay, let's go to 101 cycles and listen for change in the hum. Now it's there. Now it's 101. That says 100. Okay, now it's 100 as far as that one is concerned. Now it's 99. You can see it. Can you tell it? So a 1% change in pitch, your ear has a great deal of trouble hearing, but you can hear it. Anything less than that, you can't hear it. Not perceptive. A musician with a trained eye could, or trained ear, I'm sorry. Musician with a trained ear could. An electronics expert with a trained oscilloscope and a trained eye could see it. All right? 200. Do it. 300. We're going to speed our oscilloscope up, huh? There's still that same basic waveform. Huh? You notice that the higher the pitch, the more cycles there are. If I ran this down,
Loud too, because it's really hurt my ears.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you.
Does the volume have any correlation to that? I mean,
Oh yeah. Hey, the louder it is, the bigger it is. Look at that. All right? This means that the louder it is, the more in and out the loudspeaker is moving. And if we set it at the same thing that you could just barely hear, so it's making about the same motion, the thing that we could hear, just barely hear at 30 cycles a second, it sounds this loud to us now.
It's the same amplitude, but it's just
Same amplitude, yeah.
it's our ear that's making the difference.
Yeah, it's your ear.
can you turn it down one notch?
Yeah, I can.
What's you're raising the gain how many dBs for each time you turn it up like that?
I'm glad you mentioned that. Because I just happened to be set up to show you. I have here an old friend who's been around broadcast stations for many years, and finally it was too good to throw away, and yet they didn't want it anymore around at their place, so they gave it to the college. And we're making good use of it over here in the electronics department, if anybody should hear out there. And it's set up to measure decibel changes. Now, the way it does that, it's got some devices in there that use up the sound. So, just for the heck of it now, if that's a reference, here is what the engineers say is the smallest difference your ear can hear. And that would be about 1 decibel. It's 1 decibel louder, and it is louder because you can tell this is getting bigger. So if you watch that, you know it has to be louder because the loudspeaker's cone is moving back and forth more as that gets bigger, so the air has to have more pressure in it. Okay? 2 dB, 3 dB. Now let me tell you something right here. The difference in loudness between this point here and that point there is the difference between 50 and 100 watts.
In other words, it's double.
All that money you're spending to hear it, you're paying for this much difference in loudness. From here to 1, 2, 3 decibels. That's the difference between 50 and 100 watts, the difference between 1 and 2 watts, the difference between a milliwatt and 2 milliwatts. What I'm trying to tell you is that your ear hears on a logarithmic progression. So therefore, it ain't much Charlie. All right? Now the difference between 25 watts and 100 watts. Now let's make it 10 watts and 100 watts. In one shot, you can tell the difference here. It is a variable difference. But that's 10 watts. That would be 100 watts by comparison. Your ear can tell a 3 dB change quite readily, but if you walk into a room and an amplifier is playing so that the maximum tones are like at 50 watts, and you walk out of the room and they come back and they've turned it up to 100 watts, you cannot tell the difference. Because the difference is too small for your ear to remember how loud it was. The volume controls on the consoles you work with. Let's turn this down a little bit, huh? The volume controls on the consoles you work with, over there, the things with the meters on it, you know, these volume controls, they don't move smoothly at all. They move upwards in 2 dB steps. And you take a listen to it sometime over there and you'll find that it actually goes up a little bit, little bit, little bit, little bit, little bit. And it's done that because in the process of manufacturing, it's easy to make a logarithmic control that way. And those controls are based on a logarithmic progression like that. Like if this here is 0 dBm, this would be minus 10 on your scale, and this would be minus 20, and this would be minus 30 dBm. All right?
Well, how come when you turn that down now, looking at the numbers for cycles per second, it's not constant, it goes like down to, 103 and then up to 111 and then down.
Oh, this thing here, that's a counter. And one of the little things about those guys is it depends upon what part of the cycle they start counting. And so it's plus or minus a count for accuracy.
But that's going that's range in about 17, between about 17 cycles.
Problem, it may be down too low for this thing to catch a good count. That's what it was. Still something crazy with that because this says here it is 700 cycles. Okay, the volume was too low.
So when you turn down the volume, then it can't.
If we had a better counter, we would. And we put this together out of junk. We wrestle around from one more surplus thing or another, and why spend the money for it when this does it? Okay? You guys will be taxpayers one day. You'll appreciate working with junk. Right now, you'd like to have the most and the bestest, but when you get paying for it, you start to get the hiccups. Okay, 700 cycles, 800, 900, whoops, do it. 1,000. Okay.
A good human ear rolls off at how many kilohertz?
Would you like to see?
Please.
Let's do it. Let's put this one like that.
This is at 100 watts now?
Oh no. No, this is about 1/10 of a watt, guys, right now. Okay, as you see, it's still here. It's now 5,000 cycles. This is a switch selected generator, so I took it this kind of circuitous, man. And because we can all hear 5,000, can't we? Hear it all right? Everybody? 6? 6? 7? 8? And I may be... No, they're here. My tweeters are functioning. You guys can hear it. I'm getting kind of an old fogey. I don't hear these things as well anymore. There's 8, 9. Come on, catch it. 10. Now let's turn the volume up on this thing here and see if we can force you to hear it, huh? Can you hear it now? I'll bet his microphone over there can hear it. No, maybe not. Maybe our loud...
I can hear it.
All right. How about 11? 12? 13? 14? 15? All right. 16? Some of the kids have heard it up as high as 18. And now listen, you're getting into an area where your eye sees the screen and you know it's there, so you're telling yourself you can hear it. The eye is fun. Your body is funny. It synthesizes things for you.
Can you go back to 15?
16.
Go back to 15.
15
Okay, now
15.
Go to 16 again.
Yeah.
Okay, I can still hear it.
Now, would there be any real reason to hear something higher than you couldn't hear? Now let me tell you. Let me tell you how this works. When you're selling hi-fi, give them hell, because that's what puts bread on the table. But when you're an engineer, and you may well be one day, you should know really how this old ball game works. Okay. Now with this in mind, the highest musical sounds are about a 5,000 cycle note. Okay? About 5,000 cycles. So, at this point, your ear, which can flex even at 15,000 cycles, what's happening is that your eardrum is moving and a nerve ganglia is taking this on into your brain, and it can, when the wave front gets to be too steep, it loses contact with the dumb thing, all right? So at 5,000 cycles, you could hear the second harmonic at 10,000 fine. And you could just barely hear the third harmonic at 15,000 cycles. But you could not hear the fourth harmonic because that'd be at 20,000 cycles. If the waveform was at 6,000 cycles, you could hear the second harmonic, which would be one octave up, barely, because that'd be 12,000, and you could not hear the third harmonic at all. And I'm here to prove this to you. I have another ratty piece of gear here. How come what?
You can't even hear that. You know when you get a graphic EQ at third octave?
Uh-huh.
They put the 20,000 on there when the human ear can't.
Because somebody's going to buy it. And there is no other reason. Now listen. This thing here looks at all kinds of waves. Come here, you. Straighten out. Come on. Yeah, kick it, yeah. Now look. That guy, where is it? Hey, that's... Now, suddenly my oscillator here has got hum in it, other junk. But it is basically a sine wave, all right? You don't hear that other stuff very much. Now, if I were to convert that to a square wave, it would have significant third harmonic response, wouldn't it? But if your ear couldn't hear the 18,000 cycles, you couldn't tell any difference between the 6,000 cycle wave as a sine wave or a 6,000 cycle wave as a square wave. And a square wave is the ultimate distortion. So let's put a square wave. And you guys are welcome to do this kind of a job on your own equipment to prove it to yourself how much you can hear. Unfortunately, my square wave here has a little more output, so it's going to sound just a little bit louder until I adjust the size of this pattern to be about the same. So I'm going to put up my lousy square wave. Can you hear any difference? Now, really? If you can hear 18,000 cycles a second, and you couldn't.
Seems like it's a different quality, but... Can you repeat that?
Hey, now, remember, you are the product of New York's hype artists, which spending all the bucks in the world. And if you really sit down and listen to it, if you can't hear the 18,000, you can't hear the third harmonic, so you can't tell it's a square wave.
Can you repeat that, please?
Hmm?
Can you tell me that better?
Could I ask you if could you please turn that down in volume or pitch or something? It's really beginning to give me a headache.
You know what? Could you leave because you're the only one complaining?
No, hey, within reason. We have some other things we want to do here yet. We've got about 5 minutes more of your time, maybe a little bit more.
I'd like to hear the difference in that again, or I'd like to see the change happen.
There.
You're saying that we can perceive the difference?
Well, maybe.
I can.
Very slightly.
There's nothing.
And if I go to here, I wasn't up to 5,000 cycles here. That's probably what the problem was. Here, this damn thing changed on me. At 5,000 cycles, the third harmonic would be a little higher. I doubt if you can tell the difference there. You might well at the other one because it was at 4,000 and the third harmonic would have been 12,000. All right? Now I have 2 or 3 other things I want to do for you. I want to show you specifically that what is happening here is that the ear has the inability to change with the sound. Since the ear has the inability to change with the sound at frequencies higher than 1/15,000th of a second, or at time intervals of less than a 30,000th of a second, which would be a half cycle, then no matter what the power level, this hogwash about faster attack times doesn't count because the ear can only move about so fast anyway. So when you get into the slew rate of the ear, or how fast the ear can make a physical change, you find that irrespective of what's been said about it, that you're limited to 1/15,000th of a second because that's the fastest your ear can move. All right? You have to see it that way. Let's cut this back down. Hey, I'm on the wrong generator. Now look, at 1,000 cycles a second, sound is traveling at 1,100 feet a second. Okay? So that means that every 1.1 feet, there is a sound wave coming out here in the air. Every 1.1 feet is radiating out here. And all of your life, you've lived in an environment where the sound was bouncing off the walls at you, and your ear doesn't give a damn because it's acclimated to it. So as you move around the room, the loudness of it doesn't change a great deal, but I want you to very carefully to close one ear and move your head back and forth, and you'll find that there are dead spots in here that are just deader than dead. And I can prove that to you. Here's a sound level meter. See that dead spot there? See the sound level meter go down. And I move out of the dead spot area. Now I give it a little more gain. I have to get some more over here to deal with.
Are you getting cancellation in that dead spot?
Oh yeah, that's what it is, exactly. And they're every place in the room. Now listen. Hot spot. Right down in here is a cold spot, and there is 20 decibels of difference between that. That's 100 to 1 power ratio between the hot spot and the cold spot. 20 decibels. And if you put your ear in here like this and move around, you'll be able to hear a 20 decibel change. Now let me ask you a very worthwhile question. If the room you walk in is constantly plagued with 20 decibel holes, and it is, or more, there are some quiet rooms where they have draperies all around the walls. What in the hell is the big deal about having a sound system which is linear to within 1/10 of a decibel? Or a loudspeaker the same way? When most anything in nature has 20 decibel holes in it. So if it was flat within 5 decibels, you could hear most of what there was to hear. And if it was flat within 3 decibels, your ear couldn't tell the difference anyway. And you've seen that happen here. It's a 2 to 1 power ratio. So what's all the big deal about linearity? But there's one thing it will do for you, and that's sell hi-fi gear. You've been very patient.
By the way, putting the cart before the horse here, I failed to introduce. This is Curt Raynes, he's an instructor in the electronics department. Over at the First Air Weapons Station in the state of Oregon, which is KFMY. And he's an engineer extraordinaire.
Also a super BS artist.
I guess I'm sure you've been engineer for just about, well, quite a few
Let's
radio
not
TVs.
get into that. I worked on every station in town except K-Valve, man, and I actually ran Channel 9 for 5 years, so I know about that too.
Thank you very much.